impact investment so far. Happy to discuss after this session. Thank you very much.
Good evening. As the last of our speakers, it's my challenge to keep you entertained for just a few more minutes. I am just recently leaving the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is the world's largest bilateral donor, with an annual appropriation of about $24 billion, which we deploy across the developing world. Before that, I was the Deputy General Counsel for the Office of Management and Budget within the Office of the President. OMB not only puts together the President's budget, which is essentially a $1 trillion budget, not counting the things that we can't tell you about because it's related to our defense, but in addition to that $1 trillion budget, the other thing that OMB does is it manages against that budget. So it manages every government agency across the U.S. government. And I was in that role at the beginning of President Obama's second term. Before that, I did a number of things, including teaching and working as a principal in an investment management company in New York, which worked with companies that were seeking to do business in emerging markets. So I've done all that, but what I really am, and what I want to talk to you about today, and what I think is going to be relevant to creating an impact world, is that I'm a constitutionalist. I'm a constitutionalist at my core, and it is perhaps the most important part of my professional being because it animates every other thing that I do, even the financial things that I do. To explain why, we should go back to Philadelphia, 1787, a very hot summer. George Washington had been elected president of the Constitutional Assembly, the conference that would ultimately produce this document. He had basically been tricked into doing this because they had actually gathered there to do something else, not to create a new constitution, but to fix the one that we had before. We in America don't like to tell you that we had another constitution. It's called the Articles of Confederation. Let's just forget that that happened. So in 1787, George Washington was the president of the Constitutional Convention. Benjamin Franklin, having grown in years and approaching the end of his life, was there mainly to provide comic relief. Alexander Hamilton had not yet become a Broadway star, and yet he was a very important part of this. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, who was ultimately really the father of the American Constitution. It's an amazing gathering of individuals. But if you think of all those people I just named, you might notice that there are some similarities there. And there are some things that might be missing. The Constitution that they created was a brilliant document. Not brilliant just because of the words on the page, it was brilliant because of what it ended up doing. Now, as I described all those people, you might notice that they have some similarities. One of the things I like to do with my students is to change the facts. So let's change the facts. Let's take that group in Philadelphia in 1787, and let's introduce a woman. And not just a woman, a Muslim woman. And let's give her all the rights and privileges that would apply to any of those other delegates to the convention so that she has the ability to shape the document. It becomes fundamentally different. So in many ways, our Constitution is a happy accident. It's a happy accident because this one document, which begins "We the people" but doesn't really apply to all of the people, has grown over time, has expanded over time to apply to all of the people. And that is really the genius of the Constitution. Now, in addition to that, as a comparative constitutional lawyer and as a constitutionalist at heart, there are some basic fundamental parts of that Constitution that endure throughout just about any Constitution that's ever made. What we call the vertical and horizontal separation of powers. Federalism, meaning that we share power between the center, the central government, and the states and the localities. And a separation of powers within each of those parts of government so that we have an executive branch, a judicial branch, and a legislative branch. And in addition, we have individual rights. So those are key elements of our Constitution. Things that we often overlook, though, is that that Constitution also puts in place an economic structure. We protect property, we set a process by which taxes are levied, we regulate commerce. Our Constitution is really the beginning, it's the background system that runs behind everything that we talk about today. Without it, we don't have an opportunity to really talk about impact investing and an impact world because we don't have a framework in which to operate. All of this is important. In the American context, it's extremely important because the economic system that we put together is really meant to promote the governance system that we put together. Our Constitution is a promise. It is a promise that those who were in that room made to themselves, but it was also a promise that they made to succeeding generations. The economic system that operates within that promise is meant to fulfill that promise. It's meant to promote that promise. This is a constant challenge for us in the United States, in any capitalist system. In any capitalist system, we know that there are winners and losers. That is inevitable. The key question is, what do you do with those who are losers? How do they have an opportunity to gain a foothold within that economy, within that society? Arthur Oken would ask the question, the key question for us is how the winners treat the losers. And in a system where the winners feed their pets better than the losers can feed their children, we have a problem. But we also have an opportunity to create an economy that can give those who are left out of the system some purchase and some ability to become a part of a broader society. The work that we do at USAID and the work that we do in development abroad is intended to make that promise real. It's a promise that we promote not only within our borders, but also outside of our borders. And within the more than 70 countries in which we operate, the idea behind that is to promote American values, but really to promote human values. As proud as I am of the American Constitution, I know very clearly that it doesn't really animate current constitutional moments and current constitutional movements. In fact, the Indian Constitution is a far more relevant document. The Canadian Charter of Rights is a far more relevant document. The German Basic Law has influenced more modern constitutions than the American Constitution, other than that basic framework that I laid out. So let's not get, as an American, I don't get too full of myself in thinking about how much influence we play in this area. But what we can do, and what I think, especially given the events of the last few days, is be more humble about what the true intent of that Constitution is. And if we are going to be constitutionalists, we should think about promises, the promises that we make to each other. I live in Washington, D.C., and not too far away from the museums along the National Mall, the Smithsonian Museums. One of those museums is the National Museum of the American Indian. Not the Indian American, but the American Indian. And in that museum, there's a quote. That quote reads, "Great nations keep their word." Great nations keep their word. Great nations understand that they have made promises and that they have promises to keep. What I would ask of you is to help my great nation keep its promises, not only to ourselves, but also to you. And if we can do that, then we can truly have an impact world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, Meenakshi, Suzanne, and Matsumoto-san. I think that set good concluding remarks about the Constitution. And I would think that in India, the Constitution promise to its people is inclusive growth. At least that's the latest mantra of it, which is actually very, very relevant to conclude this session on. And inclusive growth comes from, in fact, what Meenakshi, you touched upon, which is economic growth and job creation and access to products, services, jobs, et cetera, that we've talked about for the last 2 days. So if I could just kind of summarize some of the comments here, which at least I took away, is that, one of the themes for the Indian government, potentially, is to really assess the effectiveness of government programs being implemented by the government itself versus in some form of partnership with the private sector. And I'll tell you, while we've had Jan Sinha here earlier today, and he's a true believer, the fact of the matter is, a lot of us in this room have spent a lot of time with various government officials, and particularly with the non-believers. And we have a hurdle to cross, but I do think we're making good progress in terms of getting people to actually understand that to scale up and to be sustainable, leveraging the private sector could be an interesting thing, particularly in some of the social sectors that he talked about, on the water side, et cetera. This last piece I would say is that how do we actually energize government spending, charity spending by the private sector? And what I mean by is being innovative. The social investment bonds we've talked about a bit. We've talked about the kind of programs which Meenakshi mentioned that clearly should be done by the Indian government in a more massive way. We've talked about that a lot. So there are a lot of learnings that have come through this. We really appreciate your time, and constitutionalism, as you know, in India is a very, very important thing. It's the basic right that we all have. And I would end on that, which is, the whole point that while we're here in this room is that impact investing, developmental investing, a lot of the development institutions here, a lot of that is about inclusive growth. That's why we're here. We're here focused on the fact that a lot of us have the privilege that we're sitting here in this room. And there are a lot of people, more than, 70% of the population of the world, that don't have that privilege. And the way that if we can channel capital, intellectualism, entrepreneurship, policy, to kind of really create that inclusive growth, we would have achieved a lot. So with that, I'll conclude the session, and I'll say one last thing. I really would like to, since this is the last session, really like to thank Amit, Ranjana, the whole team, who've absolutely done enormously fantastic job. And with that, we'll call you on that.
Thank you, Vikram. Thank you, everyone. Before everyone leaves, I have quick 4 thanks. I think, first of all, I want to thank all of you, everyone in the room, for taking this time out, being here these 3 days, spending this time with us. And I'm so glad John brought up the 18th century, because the man who would have been happiest on seeing what happened last 3 days has been dead 230 years. That man wrote 2 great books in that century. One book gave you all a tool which all of you swear by, and you believe that answers everything you see in the world, because when Adam Smith wrote Wealth of Nations and gave you the invisible hand, you think that explains everything. Adam Smith doesn't believe that was his seminal work. He believes his seminal work was Moral Sentiments, which he wrote 20 years before that, in which he documented how important it is to have a journey of ethics. The world felt, and Milton Friedman's that followed him, that wealth maximization can never sit with morality, and the world never spoke about that work. But if Adam Smith was here today, he would be jumping on this table and saying, you guys get it. You guys get it, that morality, ethics, and wealth maximization can coexist. So thank you to all of you, because you've helped capital find its highest purpose. Second, I want to raise a thank for all my sponsors. 14 of you, you believed in us. You felt we could make this thing possible. So all credit to you. We value your partnership, and we're proud to call you friends. So all of you, thank you very much, and that's very important. Third of all, I want to thank all IIC members here. This is one of the strongest GP-led investor council that we have seen in impact investing. Every other such association is either led by philanthropists or institutional investors or ecosystem players or government. I believe, from whatever I've seen, this is the strongest GP. But so congratulations to all of you, because you've been able to put your competition aside. You often compete for the same capital, compete for the same deal. The fact you can subjugate your personal goals for this collective, congratulations. Last of all, you've already, Vikram's raised that word of thank, but, because I've worked so closely with this team, I'm going to ask Ranjana, Neha, Sugandhi, quickly come on stage here. quickly so that we can keep moving. They both came on board. All three of them came on board from a social enterprise, which we recruited them from, called Sheroes, which puts women back into workforce after they have taken off the workforce world. So all three of them had gone off the workforce for some time. They came back and they built this, beautiful council, and they put this conference together. Thank you. But also to Saurabh, Saurabh, please come up here on stage. Saurabh is from IDFC Bank, and IDFC Bank was very kind to lend him to us for 3 months. He's worked pro bono, he's done a lot of heavy lifting, and today happens to be his birthday too. So Saurabh, happy birthday. Thank you all. And as you leave this room, we will see you again in 2018. There is a little feedback form. If you can do us a favor and put that 1 to 5 quickly on some of those columns, we'll be very happy for that. But thank you again. Godspeed, farewell. Have a good trip back home. Thank you all.
Yeah, wait, one more. Thank you.